Hello and welcome. In this session, we are going to learn one of the most important topic in AWS, which is migration of database from on-premises to AWS RDS using a tool called as DMS. DMS is called as the Database Migration Services, and if you talk about AWS or any other cloud service provider, all of the service provider, whether it is AWS in this particular demo case, or if you talk about Azure, you talk about Google, most of the cloud service provider or almost all the cloud service provider, they do provide some sort of database migration tools which helps in migrating the homogeneous or heterogeneous database to the cloud. This is for the easiness of the migration so that the customer can easily migrate their own premises or other databases to the cloud. This particular scenario is related to migration of an on-premises PostgreSQL 13 database to Amazon RDS. Though there are so if you talk about what is the preferred way of migration to the cloud in this case, so if the downtime is affordable, you go with the native tool like pg dump or pg dump all, wherein you can take a backup of your source database and you can restore it to the target environment. But we are not going to discuss about that. We are going to discuss about the DMS, which is database migration services tool, which has a lot of capability that can do homogeneous migration. That means I can migrate my PostgreSQL to the same version on RDS. That means the Postgre which is running on the source, and there will be the Postgre on the RDS. So I can do the migration. So in this tool, we will have a lot of features. One is one-time load. It is something like when we do a pg dump all and then we restore to the target database, we say we are restoring it at one time only. So we take a backup, we restore it, and we then the application is serviced to the new database which is on RDS. There are other cases as well. If you want your source database to be fully functional and operational, and you want the connectivity of the source database with the application, and whatever changes are happening, that should continuously replicate to the target database. In our case, it is RDS. In that case, the continuous replication will keep on happening in the background using DMS, which will take the changes from the source database and it will keep on replicating the target environment. So this is the main usage in our case, where in my source database, which is PostgreSQL, that is running and there is very little downtime which is provided by the application so that we can switch over during the actual cutover, and rest of the things. So the initial load, the continuous change, data capture, so those things we have to take care using this particular tool. So as usual, we will shift to the notepad. So that talks about a lot about this AWS database migration services. So this is a tool which is available in AWS only. So it stands for database migration services. So the short form is DMS. What it is used for? It is used to migrate your on-premises or cloud database, which is in AWS, to the target in cloud. It can migrate your database in a secure manner wherein encryption will be available, and it can do the transfer in a fastest way. Why are we using AWS DMS? The source database, this is very important. The source database remains fully operational. That means whatever changes are happening onto the source database, they will keep on happening. So you don't need to restrict your application to connect to your source database. It will keep on happening. So for the end user or the application, there is no change. The source database will remain operational, and we can minimize the downtime so that during the actual cutover, the database will be shut down once the replication is completed onto the target RDS, and then the switchover will happen. which are the databases, or what are all databases does it support on the source side? So DMS can migrate almost all of the enterprise or open source database. If you talk about Oracle, you talk about MS SQL, you talk about the other relational database, you talk about MySQL, you say it is Postgre, MariaDB, and on the target side, so you have so many lists. So it mainly supports two things. One is the homogeneous migration. Let's say I wanted to migrate Postgre to Postgre. That is known as the homogeneous migration. It also supports, and that is the main usage of DMS. It supports the heterogeneous migration where you can migrate from the different engine. Let's say I wanted to migrate from Oracle to Postgre. In that case, this is going to be extremely useful, and this is the main usage of DMS. DMS can do heterogeneous migration, so that is the most important feature, and that's why it is widely used, and that's used as a catching point to bring the customer to AWS cloud for the databases. So whatever databases, source databases they have, it can be used, DMS can be used. Only not the DMS will be used. There is another component which will also come into the picture, which is known as a schema change. So there is something called as a city. So that is used to schema conversion tool that will change from source to target side. Let's say I wanted to convert from Oracle to Postgre. In that case, that additional tool will be used. We are not going to talk about that. It is just a background like what all DMS can do. Apart from that, you can do a lot of things. You can replicate your multiple databases to the Amazon simple storage services, which is S3. You can put everything over there, and that's an scalable service which is available. One of the important feature of this DMS can be if you have multiple databases and you wanted to consolidate it, you wanted to put it into a data warehouse solution, something like Redshift. In that case, DMS is going to be extremely useful. So that is widely used. So this is one of the landing point for the AWS. So DMS is extremely used when you have to migrate your enterprise level databases to the open source database, and the backend it is just either MySQL or Postgre. If you talk about Aurora has two compatibility. One is MySQL, another is PostgreSQL. In case you wanted to migrate your Oracle database to the target environment, which is Amazon Aurora, then DMS is going to be extremely useful. Redshift, that is another example. If you wanted to migrate your terabyte of database which is running on Oracle to Redshift, then in that case also it is going to be extremely useful. So those things are available. So there are a lot of other things also available in case you have to do some heterogeneous migration. So that was just an introduction how about the DMS. When we talk about the simplicity, it is extremely simple. You are not going to change anything on the source database unless or until if it is a prerequisite. Let's say I wanted to continuously replicate the changes from source to target, be it any open source database, be it any enterprise database. So there are some prerequisites that has to be changed because you need to capture the transaction from the source database. I'm not talking about those, but other than that, there is no major change which is affecting your source database. You are not supposed to, or there is no scope for downloading of any driver or installing any application for migration. You don't need to download it. So everything will be there through the AWS management console. So once the migration is initiated, DMS will manage all the complexity of the migrations process which is included. So it is going to replicate the data automatically from source to the target environment. So there is something called as CDC, which is continuous data change. So that is something which is very, very important when you have to replicate the continuous data change from source to target. How DMS is going to reduce the downtime. So when you migrate your database using AWS, therein the downtime will be minimized. Why it is so? Because your source database will continuously running, and whatever changes are happening onto the source database, that will continuously replicate to the target database using the DMS tool, because it is going to do two things. One is it is going to do one-time load, which is known as full load, and then it will connect to the source database, which is Postgre in our case. It will take all the changes and it will continuously replicate to the target environment, which is our RDS. And it has the capability of showing you the report as well, like in your source environment. These are the structures which are available, and the target, this is what has been replicated. What are the supported database for AWS migration? So AWS database supports almost all category of enterprise and open source database. You can do a lot of homogeneous migration, let's say Postgre to Postgre. You can do heterogeneous migration, which is from your Oracle to Postgre. Just giving an example. Or you, if you wanted to go to some Postgre compatible databases like Amazon Aurora cluster, or if you wanted to go to data warehouse solution like AWS Redshift, in that case also it is going to be useful. Or if there is something which is running on EC2 environment, so that also can be done. So the requisite is the landing has to be there in your uh, Amazon database services. So if you talk about any open source database, enterprise database, or NoSQL database, it is going to support almost all the flavors and the engines. What is the migration cost? The AWS database migration cost is very low, because it is a migration service. If you do it manually, let's say if I wanted to migrate from Oracle to Postgre, though our this thing is not related to this, but I'm just saying, in that case you have to use Aura 2 PG, which is sometimes difficult to set up, but not that. But in this case you don't have to do anything. There will be, you just have to spin up an instance which is called as DMS according to your requirement, according to how much of CPU and RAM you want. That instance will be initiated, and you can easily connect it to your source and target environment. The only prerequisite is there should be the connectivity between source and target. So what you have to pay for, you don't have to pay for the DMS, you have to pay for the DMS instance, which is back behind the scene. It is an EC2 instance which is a spin up. So whatever CPU, memory, or the storage you are consuming, that you have to pay. So you have the flexibility of doing one time or continuous replication of DMS. Let's say in our case Postgre, though it is not recommended, but in our case we are supposed to use the PG dump all, which is a native tool. So all the cloud service providers say if you have to migrate to the cloud, your first thing is, if you can afford the downtime, you can go for your native tool, and you can migrate your data from on-premises to cloud. But in case there is a requirement of continuous replication of the database from source to target, in that case it is going to be useful. And this is why it is meant for. You can do the data validation once the data is migrated from the source to target, and in any ways your source will remain untouched. When we talk about the reliability of the DMS, the two most important capabilities of the tool is the resiliency and the self-healing. So it will continuously keep on monitoring the source and target connectivity. So if there is some kind of failure, then it is going to report you that as well. It monitors the network connectivity between your DMS instance, source, and the target. And it is going to monitor the replication instance, which is going to perform on the replication. So in case there is an interruption in network, or in case there is some problem with your source or the target database, in that case it is going to stop over there, and there is a possibility to resume the task from there onward. So these are some of the greatest features of the DMS, why it is used for. So these are some of the use cases which we have already discussed about the homogeneous database migration. When we say about homogeneous, that means your source and target engines are same, or they may be compatible. So if you talk about when I have to migrate from Postgre to Aurora cluster, in that case, both Aurora cluster, which is Postgre compatible as well. So that is a kind of homogeneous migration. In case if I wanted to migrate from Postgre to Redshift cluster, though Redshift is mainly used as a data warehousing solution wherein you have to bring the data from large source of data, let's say in Oracle, then you can use it. So homogeneous means it is the same engine and they are very easy to set up. You don't have to do any schema changes because everything will remain same. The data types will remain same. The codes and other things, they are not going to change. So it is easier to do the migration when it is homogeneous database migration. The second type is heterogeneous migration, and that is the special use of the DMS wherein source and target database engines are going to change. For example, Oracle to PostgreSQL, and there is something else as well. So why we are talking about the heterogeneous migration, and not in this demo, in another demo we will see how to migrate Oracle to PostgreSQL. So why it is so important? Like DMS is one of the solution, because DMS is going to convert the schema. It is going to convert the data types. Also, it is going to convert the database codes of the source and target, and the main task will be the conversion part. So in case there are heterogeneous migration, which is the main usage of DMS, along with the CDC of homogeneous environment, there will be one more tool which will be added to this, which is known as SCT, schema conversion tool. That is the first tool which will come into the picture, that will do all the code changes, so that source Oracle to target PostgreSQL schema changes will be done. And then using the migration service, which is DMS, we will load the data from source to target. That may be one time, and there may be the continuous data change capture as well. So that will also keep on replicating. What is the prerequisite? The source database may be on premises, which is actual requirement, or it may be in the AWS as well. But your landing position should always be the AWS. Otherwise, it is not going to identify it. The database consolidation is one of the most important use case in case you have multiple small databases and you wanted to land into AWS, one of the database, let's say in Postgre, then in that case also it can be used. So either you can go for the homogeneous migration. Let's say I have around 100 small databases ranging from 1 GB to 10 GB. Then DMS can be used, and you can land all your 1 GB to 10 GB of database from source to target. So you have consolidated everything into the AWS PostgreSQL. And or there may be heterogeneous migration wherein you can consolidate your small databases or big databases as well, big size databases from your on-premises or your AWS cloud database, or which is running on EC to the landing position in AWS RDS. So those cases also it can be hugely used. One of the greatest feature when we talk about the continuous data replication, because nowadays business is running 24 by 7, and it's very difficult to get the downtime, because business always wants the continuous access to their application. That means your database at the back end will keep on having the data changes, and there will be very difficult to get the downtime for a bigger migration. In that case, when we talk about the DMS, so there are two things. One is the initial load, which is a full load, followed by a continuous data replication, wherein data will keep on replicating from my source to the target. And DMS is going to be extremely useful when we are migrating and using this feature from source to the target. So how we are going to migrate on premises PostgreSQL database to Amazon RDS for Postgre. So the point of discussion is on-premises Postgres source database to RDS for PostgreSQL. There are two options which are available. One is AWS, which is the point of this discussion. Second is the PostgreSQL native tool. You can use your pgdump, you can use pg restore or psql, or some third-party tools are also available. You can use them. So what do we need is to perform this migration using the DMS. I should have an active AWS subscription. I should have an access to the source database. I should have created a target RDS instance wherein my database is going to be migrated. When you are going to use the RDS, you have the limitation of a maximum of 64 terabyte of database. So you need to consider this. And one of the biggest drawback is you don't have the access to the operating system. So you need to consider, in case your application is picking some of the data or dumping some of the data on the operating system of the on-premises source database. What are the products versions which are supported? It is supporting from 9.5 to 13th, which is the current working Postgre version, and 14 is in preview state. Source database, it can be on-premises PostgreSQL. For our demo, we have created it on EC2 instance, and we are going to see it. The target environment also, we have created it on RDS, which is PostgreSQL. And what we are going to use, the tool which we are going to use is AWS DMS. We are not going to use pgdump, pgrestore, and psql because our requirement is this is something which I have taken from AWS site, which talks about what are the prerequisites that we should do. So you should validate your source and target database version and the engine. So in our case, it is PostgreSQL 13. I have created it on source. You need to identify the hardware requirement for the target. That depends upon what is your source database usage for CPU, RAM, and the memory. You have to identify the capacity management as well. You have to properly manage the network requirement. You have to identify the security requirement for your source and target database. And you have two things. One is your native tool. We are not going to use that. We are going to use the AWS DMS. I'm repeating everything so that we understand what we are going to do and what are the different options available. AWS migration, we are going to do it's using the AWS DMS. For what is the best usage of this? So we are going to use it for the minimum downtime. It can support many database engines. And finally, you have to migrate your applications once your database is migrated. And now we'll see the demo. So most of the part I have already done it, because if I do it right now, it is going to create a lot of problem. And what I mean, it is going to have let me put it over here. Okay, this is really time consuming. The first thing which we are going to do is we have created an on-premises equivalent source database. So I have already created an EC2 instance PostgreSQL 13, which I have already installed, and here what I am connected to. So if you go to PSQL, and you simply say /l, which show you the databases. So I have DVD rental underscore 1 to 100 databases. We are not going to migrate all of them. So there is a separate, we can see it how to do this and migrate to EC2 instance. This is my source database, and I have made a connectivity with pgadmin as well. So this is my EC2 instance. If I just simply refresh it, you will be able to see I have 102 databases available over here, and we are going to migrate one of the schema of a particular database to the RDS using DMS. And if I show you the details of the EC2, this is something which is really very important. DMS anybody can launch and do this stuff. The only challenge will be how do you control the security. If you are not able to configure and control the proper security, you will always face the problem in terms of the connectivity, and that's sometimes really time consuming when you talk about those things. So what I have done is I have launched an EC2 instance on an EC2 instance of RHEL8, and I have installed PostgreSQL 13 on top of that. And then to connect it with my local system, what I done is you have to go to the security wizard, and there you have to do, I'll tell you what are the things which is supposed to be taken care. So you always see the inbound rule. In the inbound rule, you have to say, I want access of this EC2 instance using port number 22. So you have to enable SSH, and you have to mention the IP address, to which IP address you want to give the access. These IP addresses are dynamic IP address, they will keep on changing. So if you try to access that, they will never be accessible. So on port number 22, from this particular IP address, I'm trying to access this EC2 instance, so I'll be able to do. The second thing which I should be doing is I need to access PostgreSQL port, which is 5432 from my local system. And once you add these two to inbound rule, you should be able to access it from your local system whose IP may be something like this. And one of the other thing which you have to do in over here is you need to go to pghb_conf. Here also you need to mention the IP address from where you wanted to access your EC2 instance or your on-premises environment. These are the some of the basic things which you need to take care, otherwise you will not be able to access it. So this is all about the source environment. Let's go to the second step. So this is very important. On premises or EC2 instance where your Postgre 13 is running, make sure the security group inbound rule allows the IP address of your system from where you are going to access it, and pg_hba.conf, that should have the IP address of your from where you wanted to connect. When you talk about the RDS PostgreSQL 13, it's the launching is very easy. There are just few clicks wherein you have to click it, and it will allow the launching. What is the most important part? The most important part of the RDS is as well. Once I'll show you where is our RDS. Let's go back to the RDS. Sometimes it is very slow. This should be coming up any moment. Okay. So this is an DB instance which I have launched in RDS. So if you see the details, it is PostgreSQL engine. I have used DBT3 micro and 5432, which is the default port. This is the host name. And the security group, this is of utmost important. You need to make sure that the security groups are properly handled. Otherwise, rest of the things are just few clicks and the instance will be launched. So I'll show you what is that important part in your inbound rules. So always control your inbound rule and outbound rule based upon your requirement. So inbound rule, I wanted to access my RDS instance from my local system. So I have mentioned the port number, the PostgreSQL port, which is 5432, and the IP address of my local system, so that using PG admin I should be able to connect. So I'm already connected to the RDS instance. If you see here, if I just say refresh, there is a system database which is called as RDS admin. So you can see that I have already connected it through the RDS instance. The only requirement is you need to control your security group. In our demo case, it is publicly accessible, but that's not the requirement in actual. Then the third thing which you need to do is you have to connect both the instance using pgadmin, which we have already done. Now you have to spin up a DMS instance for the replication purpose. So what you have to do is you go to the AWS DMS dashboard, and here you will say create database migration. Sorry, where is DMS instance? So this is what you have to do. This is the first thing. After you have created two instances, one is my EC2 instance, which is my source environment, assuming it is synonymous to my on-premises PostgreSQL server. Then I have created the RDS environment, and I have connected my source and target using the pgadmin. Then we have to create a replication instance. You just give some name and you give some class as well. Maybe we'll do a small demo after this, wherein we will try out those steps in a very fast way so that you can follow it step by step. So you just have to mention the details and then it is done. Once you have launched your DMS instance, just note down the public IP and private IP. Once it is done, you have to create the endpoints. When you create the endpoint, the first one will be your source endpoint. In the source endpoint, you will have to give the name of your source environment. So let me show you. So you have to mention, so if you go here, probably I'll do one so that it will be easy to um, validate it. Let me show the modify page. Then you have to, so once you say create endpoint, it will show you two options, source endpoint and target endpoint. The first thing we wanted to connect to our source database, which I'm assuming it is on my on-premises environment. But for our case, it is EC2 instance. So I have given some identifier like it is EC2-Postgre 13, or otherwise in normal case, it will be on-premises Postgre 13, or you mention the server name, something like that. The source engine, what is my source engine? My source engine is PostgreSQL. So I have given the name. Provide access information manually. What is the server IP address? So this is the server IP address or the host name. So you manually give the IP address over here. Mention the port name. If you wanted to use SSL mode, which you should, but in our demo we are not doing it. Just say none. And mention the admin user. For our case, we have said Postgre. Password will give to the Postgre, and which database you want to connect to. We are going to connect to DVD rental because we have some 15 tables and we want to migrate DVD rental sample database from source to target environment. Endpoint settings, we are not going to do anything, and just save it, and your this thing will be created. Once it is created, you can test the connection. This is something which is time consuming, and this mostly fails because of some kind of security guidelines if you are not following. So you just have to do the run test because it is going to check whether your source endpoint, that means an endpoint, can connect to your source environment or not. If it is not successful, that means your migration task will not start. This is a prerequisite. And what is the guideline which you have to follow? The security group of your on-premises environment, or in our case EC2 instance, that should allow the incoming request from DMS. So if we go to EC2 instance, we have to mention the IP address. So this is the IP address of my DMS environment. I am saying on 5432 allow the IP address of my DMS so that it can connect. So in the inbound rule of your EC2 instance, you should have the incoming request of your DMS IP, because DMS is going to connect to your PostgreSQL source database. So this is mandatory, otherwise it will show you a number of errors. So our connection is successful, that is fine. That means our source stuff is fine. Now let's go back to the other. uh, if you check this, we are going to create the another endpoint, which is our target endpoint. So there are two bullets, so you just select target endpoint, and then you mention the name, some usable name, sorry, some meaningful name, so that you can identify. You have to mention the target engine. You have a lot of target engine, but in our case it is homogeneous migration, Postgre to Postgre, so you have used Postgre. Then we are going to provide the access information manually. This is the host name or public host name of my RDS instance. This is the port number. We are not using the SSL mode. This is the username, which is admin username Postgre. You have to feed in the password, and this is the Postgre. Endpoint settings, we are not doing anything, and just you say save and it is done. Once it is done, you have to do the connection. You have to do the test connection. You have to run the test, otherwise it is going to fail. Why it is going to fail? You have to have the security group of RDS, ensuring that it is. So let me show you the RDS security group. If you go to the RDS and you check the security group of your RDS instance, you will be able to see the details. And this is going to be very, very important, very critical. Otherwise, it is going to take away a lot of your time just in troubleshooting. Just go to the DB instance, which is of your interest. In our case, we have just one. Just click this. On the right hand side, you will be able to see the security group. So this is my default security group. Just click this, and I forgot the name. What was the name? Okay, this is already selected. Just check the inbound rule. What is the important part in RDS security group details? So you have to add the when you say add rule, in the add rule you have to say PostgreSQL, and you have to uh, add the IP address of your DMS. You have to add the IP address of your DMS, otherwise it is not going to work. This is very, very important. The IP address of DMS has to be added on both the places, on source and the target side, because DMS is the one which is going to talk to both source and target. So inbound rule should allow the IP address of DMS on both EC2 and RDS. So that IP address should be available over there. And here also in RDS, you need to make sure the IP address is added with the port number. And if you are trying to connect from your source, from your system, the IP address will also be mentioned over here. So that's very, very important. And one of the most important thing is, if you see some kind of issue, then you need to check the IP security group of your application instance. So let me go to the replication instance and show you how the security group looks like. This is the security group. You have to just check the inbound rule. Where it is gone. I think this is the one, DMS security group. And now okay, this is the replication instance, and in the replication instance, just click the replication instance. This is just what do you say, the EC2 instance only. And this is your sorry, this is your security group. So this should come automatically. You can see the outbound is like this. I'm not sure if I'm checking the correct one. So the endpoint public IP and the private IP, you need to make sure you have it. And when you are connecting to the RDS, they have to be properly taken care of. Otherwise, it is going to fail out. The final thing, we have created the replication endpoints. We have tested it, and then we will go ahead and initiate the migration task. I have done this earlier, so let me go to, this is my target environment, and let me drop, where is the schemas? Let me drop this. This is dropped on the target side, so we'll go ahead and initiate one migration task. I'll show you step by step so that it will be easy to follow, since this will be becoming very large. So I thought using it whatever I have it. This is my replication task. So let me show you how it looks like. So you simply say create migration task. You have to give the task name. So I'm just saying task 2 EC2 to RDS PostgreSQL 13 migration, something like that. You can say start task on modify. So once it is modified, uh, you just say save, and it is going to execute. So what are the different things which are going to happen when your migration starts? So it is going to target table preparation mode. Is that if the tables already exist, don't do anything. If it exists, drop tables on target. So it is going to drop and then recreate it. Otherwise, if data is already there, you wanted to truncate it, it can do that as well. If you have the LOBs, then if you say I don't want to include the LOB, or if you say I want to load the full LOB, that is also possible, or you wanted to limited the LOB, that is also possible. You can do the enable validation part, wherein if you wanted to say uh, choose the setting, if you wanted to DMS to compare the data at the source and the target. Immediately once it is performed after the full load, it can be done. It will show the report in your S3 bucket like this is what has happened, and this is matching, this is missing. You can create the AWS migration logs as well, and you will see the different kinds of the alarms which will be created. Once it will show you the error, warning, default, debug, or detailed debug, these things. In our case, it is just a demo, so depending upon your requirement, if you have a number of objects which needs to be validated, you make sure that you enable the validation. If you wanted to do some kind of table mapping, let's say on my source it is A, on target it wanted to be something else, then you can do that. Now this is the first thing which is starts. Enter a schema. If you have multiple schemas, if you wanted to migrate all of them, you just mention percentage. That means it is going to pick up all the schema. So other than a schema, you don't have anything. In particular schema, if you have the all the tables, you just include percentage, or if you say include, it will allow you to do those things. It has the transformation rule as well. If you wanted to modify something on the target side also, that's possible. So you just simply say save, and the moment you do it, it is going to start your migration. So in our case, we have done the full load, but we will be doing the full load plus CDC as well, and only CDC is also possible. So it is going to, it is running. So this is mainly 5 steps only. If you are able to control your what do you say, the just the security groups, and most of the things will be working fine. This should not take more time. It depends upon the amount of the data. For our case, it is very less, so it is not going to take more time. Any moment, this will show that it has let's say if load complete. I think initiated again. So I have initiated again, and I have clicked the drop and recreate, so it is going to drop and recreate. And if you connect to this, we have only one schema because it has already dropped it, I believe. So you will not be able to see second one, but the moment it comes up again, it will come up. So let's wait for a couple more, maybe another 1 minute or so. This is starting. So just a recap, there are 5 steps available in this demo. Maybe we'll do all the steps by launching. Maybe that is going to take 2 hours or something like that. In the first step, we created an on-premises equivalent EC2 instance with Postgre 13 running. We imported one sample database, which is DVD rental. Then we connected to pgadmin, and we ensured pg_hba.conf as the IP address of the system where you want to connect with, so that you can easily visualize your database. So that is one thing. In the second part, in the second step, we initialized one RDS instance of Postgre 13. We noted down the endpoint, and in the inbound rule, we have added the IP address of the system from where we are connecting to, and the DMS IP address as well, so that it is easier for us to make sure that we are connected. Then in the third step, we connected with pgadmin, and in the fourth step, we launched a DMS instance, which is a EC2 instance having the conversion tools, the DMS tools. And in the fourth step, we launched the source endpoint, target endpoint, and we finally launched a DMS instance task, The task has the details of the source endpoint and the target endpoint, and finally it replicated the data in one shot, which is just one time load only. So I think it should have come back now. Still, I think it is running. Okay, this is done. We'll see the details. Table statistics, you can see what all tables were migrated. So it is customer, payment, film actor, store, city, and these were there in your public schema. And let us see, we should have dropped it there as well. Okay. There are some validation failures as well. Refresh. I think I have dropped that table. If you go to the source environment, you should be able to see the tables. In my DVD rental, you have the public schema. In your public schema, you will be able to see the tables. So these are the tables which have been loaded from source to target. There is no end of this thing. Maybe in second demo we will see step by step launching everything. That will be of 2 hours or something like that, and I think hopefully that will be helpful. And thank you.